Good morning and welcome to WNHH's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make the Elm City tick. Well, it's another day in this country and we're getting a lot of information to the point of information overload about the crisis of the death of African Americans at the hands of law enforcement in this country, the uprisings that have followed the latest revelations and videos, protests planned to continue, as well as a COVID-19 pandemic that's also flooding us with information and trying to figure it out. So I'm going to try something a tiny bit different today in Dateline New Haven. I have two people who have been helping me, to most extent at a distance, try to figure out how to cut through the overload and say, what really should we be thinking about now in these troubled times, a time unlike any we've lived through? And what should we be focused on as we move forward? Two people very involved in what's going on in our city. Karen DuBois Walton is the executive director of Elm City Communities. That's the housing authority. That's her formal title. She also plays an informal role as being a leader of a lot that happens civically in the city, whether it's sororities, public events, readings. And good morning, Karen DuBois Walton. Thank you for coming on air with me.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Pastor John Lewis is one of the foremost promoters of nonviolence in our community. He's the pastor of Christ Chapel New Testament Church, and he trains many people, including police officers, in tactics of nonviolence. He knows the cops, he knows the community, and he's given me some really good feedback in the last week of how I could do my own job better so that the media doesn't fan the flames. Pastor Lewis, thank you for coming on this morning.
Good to see you, Paul.
So before we proceed to what to look at next, I just wondered if each of you could tell me how you were personally affected by the revelations of what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis. How did that touch you personally? What was your reaction? How has it impacted your life?
I would like
start with you.
You want me to start? So I typically don't make it a practice to watch videos like what came out of Minneapolis. I certainly read the story and follow the news reporting on it, but I also often don't watch the actual video. This one, for whatever reason, I was called to actually watch, and sat through and felt my heart break wide open. I sat there and literally realized that I was watching a man die in front of me, that I was watching, initially I thought I was watching one man take another man's life. Came to realize that I was watching several officers, right, involved in taking a man's life, and that he was literally dying on screen in front of what I was watching. So my heart broke, and I felt that pain and sadness. I felt anger and rage at what I was seeing. I felt, as I was looking into the eyes of this officer, just wondering of what is there, that there could be such a lack of humanity, that there could be so little awareness that one's knee was on the neck of a human being. You know, in my faith world, right, a creation of God under your knee, and with no recognition of that. I also felt for, and I wanted to be able to reach out and touch the people that were there and videoing and standing witness to what was happening, and to ensure that that story was coming out. And I felt for what I realized later was a very, 17-year-old young girl who was filming that. And then I immediately went to where I go often with this, which is I'm the wife of an African American man. I am the mother of two young men, Black young men, and the fear that I fear all the time, for the worry I have all the time for them, was very present, of what it's like to walk this world as a young man. And immediately went to, this is on top of the loss of Breonna Taylor, and this was on top of the loss of Ahmaud Arbery, all in recent, and it was on the heels of seeing this horrible situation in Central Park with a woman who weaponized whiteness in a way that could have led to very different outcome for Christian Cooper. And it was just on top of. And so I think I was feeling that pain, anguish, and anger and rage of all of that.
All right, I want to get back after we hear from John, the video question. Thank you for sharing that, Karen Du Bois Walton. Pastor John Lewis, what was your reaction? I mean, you work with cops, you know officers who wrestle with how they react to tough situations. What was going through your mind, and how has it affected you?
Paul, anytime that I see something like that, I mean, again, as Karen mentioned with the Eric Garners and so many other before this, again, my fight for justice and my fight for peace and unity among just human beings, period, amongst the race of people, it takes me back to my study and my history when we talk about slavery and how even that there's a book called They Stole It and We Must Return It. Well, it was the slave master's job to really dehumanize and take away the black male out of the presence of the family and publicly dehumanize him so that it would create such a fear that no other black male or no even mother would ever want their child to try to go against law enforcement or those that are considered in power. And so again, I had to quell that emotion. And with the work that I'm doing today, and now it brings me into a mindset like, how about it's not an individual like me who understands the practice of nonviolence, who understands fighting for justice, a young man that's standing there, that hatred that will come in that young man's heart, that looks at that, or that young woman's heart that looks at that African-American male underneath the knee of that officer for that period of time. And what's more heart-wrenching is that officer had an opportunity to let him live, and he chose not to. That's what makes this different. It was live. It was videotaped. When the officer could have let this man live, but he chose not to. It starts to really resonate in the emotions of just people of color around this nation, of what had we've been experiencing for 400 years or more. That the decision to let us live, the decision to let us be who we're all created equal, really, but this is how we are treated. So we can't just leave it at that officer's knee on that George Floyd's neck and how he allowed his life to be taken. This is an emotion that's been built up for so many years. So when I saw that, it hurts. I mean, I got a son. I'm an African-American male. I got nephews. And so it is not, I don't just think about myself. I think about them and not being able to really know probably how to defend themselves or to interact with an officer, and they might wind up in that situation. So that's real. However, it makes me want to fight harder for the work that I do and working with that officer. It takes me back to the practice where I need to understand what happened to that officer, that he lost the respect for life. What happened to him? What pain or hurt is in his mind? What did he go through in life that would make him want to do such a thing like that? So again, it's not excusing the act, but it's understanding that we are dealing with a society, not just with victims, but those who come out of generational victimizers, those individuals who have a lineage of coming up out of those, again, when we go back to slavery, these are generational things that stem way back. It's not just about that moment. It's about people that have been impacted from generations before on both sides.
It's so important, Pastor Lewis, that you're making sure to put this in the context of this country's history, that is not isolated. Because too often I think the pull is to respond to it as though it's an individual and we need to deal with that individual officer and root out that issue without looking at the systemic issues that have men and women losing their lives, Native people, Latinx people, African-American people that are losing their lives because of racism in this country. And we have to come together in ways that we can head on address the fact that this country was founded on stolen land, built with stolen labor, and is a history that's rooted in protest from its very beginning and founding. And so we need to figure out how to bring all that together.
All right. I'd also like to figure out how we go about toward that, and with Karen Du Bois Walton from the Elm City Communities, Pastor John Lewis, and WNHHFM. We got a bunch of comments, but first I wanted to follow up the first 2 points you made. Video. So Karen, as a white person, I've been very interested in hearing some from African Americans this week about how they don't watch the video. They called it on, Al-Jamari from Black Lives Matter calls it video porn or trauma porn, saying we know this happens, it's happened for 400 years. But activists also say it's important for white people to watch the videos because it's happened for 400 years. What's different now is that we see it. And without video, I think it would have been harder to make the case to the general public. So on the one hand, the video re-traumatizes people who are victims of this and live with it every day in the way you two described it, even if when you're worried about your own kids. And on the other hand, even just last night, I was about to go to bed and these videos pop up of Black customers not being allowed at a downtown market where white people go in and out. That would not have been communicated fast and without being able to be argued about without video. So they were comfortable, and the Yale cops by now, cops used to like threaten us physically and arrest us if we took video. Now they see everyone taking video. So what do you think about the role of video? Who should watch it and when? And are you glad it's out there?
Oh, I think there's so many layers to this, right? So the fact that that those officers were aware that video was running that entire time, and that did not in any way change the behavior.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. We have to deal with that, right? We have to wrestle with that and what that means about how we've empowered law enforcement and how we have dehumanized as a society entire groups of people, right? So that it doesn't even matter. So I raised that, but I also raised, if we think about the Ahmaud Arbery, right? Video existed. Law enforcement had viewed that video. Prosecutors had viewed that video, but it wasn't until the video was released to the general public and there was outrage that action started to happen that really got the facts raised and the beginning of action. And on any of these, we have to wait and see what's going to happen, because we've been in the place before where we've seen things come out that seemed very clear to the layperson and has not resulted in conviction or anything that we would deem justice in this this current society's definition of what justice means. So I think we still have to play it out and see, but it's certainly the presence of that video has changed the course of how things have played out. I think what I also want to say though is this is a society that allows us to live such segregated lives, that there are things that happen in people's communities that are so well known within that community, but because of the segregation, people can live a block away from that community and have absolutely no idea what goes on, what is the day-to-day reality in the community. And so, again, the dehumanization that's happened as a result of racism has made the voice of that community not sufficient. So people have been raising this to powers that be for decades, for hundreds of years, and their voice alone has not been sufficient because we have determined who has value and who doesn't. And so that voice, backed up now by video, has become something that has added some power and has enabled some things. And I think we have to wrestle with that as well. Why isn't the voice of the Black and Brown community sufficient? Why is it only when white people can see it on a video that it becomes something to be believed? I think we have to wrestle with that also.
And also, just kind of dovetailing on what Karen's saying, is that what we have to realize is that, Paul, we have the ability, we have leaders and those individuals that may have been around a little longer than others, but there's a generation that's coming up that do not know how to articulate their pain and the things that they deal with. So by them watching this and by them seeing this, it impacts them in a very real way, because it makes them feel less valued even when they watch something like that. It psychologically does damage to the babies, and my grandchildren don't even understand. You know, even with the videos out and them watching that, or even because they got access to stuff, we got to be careful of what we allow our children to see. You know, and so there has to be a balance to that. The video has helped us be able to see clearly what's been going on for years, but yet, even though the videos are clear, still the convictions don't equal to what is being seen. And that lets you know the heart of the people that are in power. That's a problem. That's a real problem when you can watch that and justify it in such a way. So what it does, what video does, is clearly let us know the people that are in powerful positions, what they're willing to risk and put up to change things. And let me say this to you, it hasn't been much. It has not been much of what they're willing to really change laws and policy. We have to, it's almost like the video is saying, or what was happening with the protests and the violence, you know, you don't hear us. We've been trying to talk for years about what's going on. And so it has to get to a place of violence in order for you them to almost say, do you hear me now? Can you hear what I'm saying now? So what we're seeing going on around the nation that's being video, can you hear me now? Because you have not been listening. So video, again, to me, it has to really be balanced. And like Allah said, I believe you said with Black Lives Matter, it's trauma porn. You become desensitized sometimes to what is going on. It's almost like, you know, it changes the direction almost. It's not something that we should videotape. I don't want to videotape a young woman being beat by a man, whether it's a police or not, and you stand there and watch and videotape that. So again, we got to balance that out. Instead of help the situation, you want to watch somebody get beat to death, not just by the police, but even by our own community. So we have to balance that out with the video.
And building on that, I just think as a reporter, I've noticed the difference when Malik Jones was killed by an East Haven police officer, that I think if people could have watched it on video, there wouldn't have been controversy as much. This was 1997. I remember for weeks trying to nail it down. There was no video. I finally found an East Haven Italian-American man who hated the Black community, who worked across the street and admitted to me what he had seen, which was completely opposite of what the officers had seen. The officer got off based on these versions. Then 2 decades later, when the U.S. Justice Department got rid of those East Haven cops, they began with video of an officer doing the opposite during a fake arrest from what he said. Building on what you guys said, it's amazing how that works about the role videos played. And I just want to catch up with a few people here. Babz Rawls-Ivy says that she points out that Rodney King was on video. He had video for assaults of Black people. Now police have body cameras, and yet each assault is explained away. And when white folks see the video, they still believe that whatever caused these actions must be something we've done that was not captured on video. Babz, Dr. Du Bois-Walton raised an important question. Why aren't Black and brown voices enough? Why isn't what we say is happening to us credible enough to be believed? Rodney Williams, why did it take this long for Black leadership to stop this from happening? It's gone on too long. Karima Mickens says, why isn't the voice of Black and brown people sufficient? Tennille Nixon says, the Babz Rawls-Ivy truth. Tamara Collins, we have learned videos don't seem to be enough. Tennille also says, boycott that market on Broadway. Let's not forget the sisters who have been killed. And Babz says, Black pain porn. Tamara says, guidelines and laws need to be implemented for police brutality and training. Communities need to be held with law enforcement on a consistent basis so we understand each other. Ronnie says, Karen, we appreciate all you do. I would ask you and other Blacks who reach the part of the mountain that you sit on to please make sure people like yourself create opportunities for people in our communities, and that the properties where people have been shot, if you could look into why people don't feel safe. And Jaywan Carter, fact is, mayors control police departments. Simple. Police unions provide due process. Legislatures provide funding and laws on when, what, and how. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. You're listening to Dateline New Haven on WNHH FM 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenprint.org, with Pastor John Lewis and Dr. Karen Du Bois-Walton of Elm City Communities. And I did want to talk about not just what's happened, but what's next. what we're focusing, we can focus on anything, any hour, because so many outrages come through our feeds and we're all addicted to our phones. Maybe not all. I'm one of them. I wish I were less addicted. You know, I'm reading about what President Trump did. That was like a, you know, a banana republic getting police to attack unarmed protesters so he could have a photo op at its church. I'm looking at attacks on the Constitution, law enforcement that's not wearing the badge, discussion about whether infiltrators are creating violence at protests and whether stories become, is someone going to get hurt? We got one at 3 o'clock today. People are saying, is there going to be trouble, or is this going to be a really vital, and is a vital opportunity for people to be heard? Karen Du Bois, one, you've addressed this. I don't know if you know, I've been like watching some of the stuff you've been posting. It's been really interesting about your critiquing what we pay attention to and what we should be paying attention to. As we move toward another weekend of needed protest, what should we be looking for? What should we be paying attention to?
Well,
Okay.
I think that, you know, I think it's important to figure out how we're going to make a moment be something more than a moment, and be a real opportunity to move our communities forward in terms of a racial equity frame, right? And you know, I pay attention to what folks' actions say and how they're aligning with what they're saying. And so, you know, I'm watching, there are protests popping up everywhere, all over in suburban communities in Connecticut as well. And my hope is that that will be a moment to reflect on what do those suburban towns do to make it to address race equity there. Those that are standing and holding Black Lives Matter right now, are they going to be at the zoning meeting allowing for the building of some affordable housing in those towns so that people can actually live in the towns, right? How are we going to transmit this moment into long-term action that reflects that we believe that in the humanity of all and the shared humanity of all? I think it's an opportunity to shift the way we think about, right? We need to examine things and figure out not just why they are the way they are, but also dream about other solutions. And what I love about protest is that I think it creates the opportunity for us to expand what we accept as normal and the way it needs to be, and opens up our ability to think very broadly about a lot of other possibilities. I think we have to examine the use of force policies. I think we have to examine the segregation in our communities. I think we have to examine what we empower police to do, what we call on police to do. Right? We've become a society that expects police to solve problems that should not be policing problems. And we have created situations that have over-policed certain communities. You know, I think we have a really strong model of how you build safe communities and the work that we do here. We have rebuilt some of the most under-resourced communities, going back to Elm Haven, Monterey, Quinnipiac Terrace, Brookside, Rockview. Any of those communities, under-resourced communities, had issues with criminal activity as a result. We held community meetings in there to a T. When people were offered an opportunity for a hugely improved, rebuilt quality community, or we could put a whole lot more police in there, nobody says, give me more police, right? Folks want quality communities. And in every one of those where we've offered people quality housing, where we've offered communities where people unsubsidized and market rate renters and homeowners live in the same communities, where we've offered people opportunities to dream about what they want for their lives, and then the services and education that helps them get there. We have seen Elm Haven and Monterey, Quinnipiac, Brookside, Rockview, in all of them. We're doing Farnham right now. In all of them, we've seen that that's the way you build strong community, right? You don't do it with walls. You don't do it with heavy police presence. Right? You do it by giving people quality things, and you resource them, and you give them the same thing any of us need. And I think there are models there to think about in terms of where we move forward. Do we respect people's humanity? Do we respect people across race, across socioeconomic status, across sexual orientation, across able body and disability, across cis and trans lines, right? Do we respect people's humanity and create space in our communities that are inclusive and that respect that and shift from some of our old ways that have privileged just a few and marginalized many?
It's interesting you say that about an opportunity and protest to think about things in new ways. I've experienced that over the last 24 hours. I was having a hard time getting my mind around this idea about police abolition. I was thinking, well, that's not going to fly. I never heard anyone in the community say, I don't want cops to come. Then I started reading up on what they mean.
What it means.
They kind of mean what you just said. They don't mean get rid of police officers. So I think it might not be the greatest marketing with that phrase, but they're not saying fire all the cops, don't have a cop come if someone gets shot. They're saying rethink gradually, exactly what you just said, Karen. If cops feel they shouldn't be social workers, let's pay for social workers. Let's not send cops to every problem because they agree they can't solve every problem. They want to be partners. Let's look at ways to attack the reasons people go into crime earlier so that they don't cause the crime, and gradually shift money, just like trying to shift money from a military to domestic uses. Police are military, to serve from our local military. Doesn't mean we hate the person in the uniform. They're often people in our family. So I agree with you about this opportunity. I know my mind's been
Paul,
Paul,
but let me say also too exactly what you and Karen are saying. But I think also with the protests, and again, it's not about abolishing police, because we've had great relationships and we're getting better with our relationship, but you can't, I know I can speak for New Haven with Chief Reyes and Chief Higgins, and even with the training, the nonviolence training that we've been doing with the police department, and where they are willing to really attempt to work with different organizations. The police cannot be social workers also. And so again, not excusing their behavior, but I just believe every department and every police department need to invest in partnering with different organizations that have had boots on the ground, that they've been involved with the community that they're policing. They're in the Kenyan nonviolence, there's 6 steps that should be followed, not only in protesting, but even in when you're going to try to police or anything that you're engaging with a community. You got to gather your information. Information is very important. Once you get the information, educate your people that are in your organization. And then you have to get, and where I believe that the departments fail and other organizations fail, and even the protesters fail, you must get that personal commitment. What are you in for the change? Because too often what happens, you get people to come in and not, again, as an officer, you make money, but we're dealing with a community that's riddled with violence, broken homes, got social issues, got behavior issues. So you cannot come in as an officer thinking you just gonna have a job. You got to be committed also to the change that is necessary for this community. Now, you cannot look at it as you would Guilford and all these other communities that don't have this level of violence. You're coming into almost what is like a war zone. So you got to be sensitive to that. And you can't come in here militarized or want to come in and just police. You got to understand the community, make sure you're educated on it, and are you committed for that change? And let me just say this about the protesting. I don't think they should stop protesting until the things that is needed is put on the table. The other step to that, you have the Kenyan nonviolence is information gathering, education, personal commitment, then there's negotiation. Let's see where we can come into an agreement and move forward. So there are steps to everything. And I just think sometimes we got a lot of emotional people involved in stuff when it comes down to protesting. I think that we got a lot of officers that's just looking for a paycheck. And in this time that we're in the community that we're in right now, in the state that the nation's in, you can't just be about a paycheck.
I guess I want to push back a little bit because I think perception and language is so important and so tied into what we're talking about here. I think if officers come onto the New Haven or any urban police department with the mentality that they're going into a war zone, I think that is part of the problem, right? And I think we have to, there are urban issues, absolutely, right? And there's a need for community policing, a community policing model. And I think New Haven has had moments where we have really shined around community policing, in the ways in which the leadership and the rank and file have embraced community policing, and I think it needs to be recognized, absolutely. But there's something that's troubling to me about the militarization of local police departments that have taken on this sort of war zone approach, and are the level of equipment and riot gear and things. And I'm not specific to New Haven. You look at what you're seeing across the country on this. I think it's an opportunity to sort of redefine, and it's a long-term commitment, clearly, but to redefine those relationships. But we can't have folks sent out into our neighborhoods with the mentality that they're going into a war zone and then expect that they're not going to act like an occupying.
Are you saying? Let me. Are you saying that I said that it's a war zone? What I said is that they cannot. In other words, when you have a community that you're going into, that you have violence amongst the individuals that live in that community, and there's battles going on, that officer, if he comes from the military, he's not coming in there with the mentality to serve a community. He's coming in based on his experience. So what I'm saying is that they can't come in here thinking that they're just going into a war zone. They got to come in here ready to implement and be invested to change that.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about that on Dateline New Haven, WNHH 103.5 FM, live stream at newhaven.org. I want to ask you how you see this problem develop in your own jobs. Karen, you've had such an interesting resume in New Haven because you've sort of been at every level of government. You were the chief administrative officer of the city, so you kind of every day dealt with the line departments, you know, sweeping the streets, policing. You were in charge of the police department, fire department. Then you were chief of staff at City Hall. Now you're overseeing a large percentage of the people who live in New Haven live in facilities you monitor. How does that work change now? How does your work change?
You know, and I want to take you back actually even further, because I think, you know, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, and I trained at the Child Study Center, specifically in the Child Development Community Policing Program, that brought together New Haven officers with clinicians from the Child Study Center, particularly specifically to go out into the community and do real community-based work in the aftermath of traumatic situations that might happen within home and domestic violence kinds of things, or might be community-based. It included, you know, opportunities to work really closely, to ride along, to go out and respond to things with officers in real time. And that was my real first introduction to the New Haven Police Department, and was a really essential part of what was the community policing model. This would have been like mid 90s in New Haven. From there, you know, did a number of other things, and then yes, as chief administrative officer and as chief of staff, had roles in city government. You know, I would say that my thinking has evolved over time about what I thought, how I approach some of these issues as well. And I hope that any community leader can grow and evolve with, you know, more experience and more information. So I think it's absolutely
back to that, Karen,
where I am right now. I think we've got strong partnerships. We believe in community policing. We work with Chief Reyes. We work with a number of his officers. Several of his officers live in our different developments in the program that we have partnership. We work with the district managers on things. We are a part of the community, and so we're a part of community policing. And
can I bring you back to one part of that, Karen?
Oh, sure.
I had forgotten that as a clinical psychologist, you start out working at the dawn of New Haven's experimental partnership, where cops trained with child psychologists, social workers, and they would go out to the scene of violent crimes and deal with young people who witnessed violence so that they can deal with it productively rather than have, strike out later and get in more trouble. And so, I'm so interested in what you said about thinking.
Pastor and Chief Waring,
Yeah.
Donald Cohen at the
So
time.
I'm thinking about the evolution. So that was Dick Gephardt, the U.S. Speaker of the House, made that a national program. Everybody loves that program. I love that program. You're talking about how we rethink and evolve based on new information. One of our listeners, Tom Breen, asked, but you did answer his question earlier about police abolition and cutting money budget to the other uses from the police. Would that be an example? Because we're saying police can't be social workers, so we team them with social workers. You saw it work. You were there in the trenches. Right. Do you now look back at it in the new context? And since we're talking about what they're calling police abolition, which is really gradual redirecting resources to solve community problems, do you think maybe instead of pairing officers with child psychologists, you just fund more child social workers and psychologists and fewer cops? I mean, has that program run its course?
I think the program was helping to ensure that that officers understood human development, right? Which I think honestly needs to be in every setting, right? Teachers need to understand human development. Right? We can expand that into all areas. So it was equipping them with other skills, as well as bringing the resource of the clinicians to the table.
Can I catch us up? I'm sorry.
Pardon?
I apologize. I interrupted you.
Yeah. So no, I would not say that program has run its course. I think that's a piece of community policing that it aligns with the kind of stuff that you hear progressive folks in Minneapolis talking about right now. It aligns with the police abolition activists. The idea of bringing resource that police power won't solve the things we want to address in our communities by itself. It is one tool. It can't be the only tool we fund. It can't be the tool we fund in excess to the disadvantage of anything else. And the more we fund the other things, the more we ensure that kids graduate high school ready for the workplace. The more we ensure that there are work opportunities. The more we assure that people live in safe housing. The more we assure people have access to their behavioral health care needs and medical needs. Right? The more we take care of those things, the less we need to rely on police departments.
Hey, Paul, let me say this too. Let's be realistic here. The reason why New Haven hired a lot more police is because there was more violence. Am I correct? There was more violence in the community that they were policing. So being that the violence went up, that means that there was less of that work being done. We have more families of incarcerated fathers whose parents are not there. We have more drugs that have been in our community. So of course, if that is the case there, then that means that the police, they have to hire more police. You got police that have to have more overtime. The social part of the community has been lacking what it really needs in order for them to really try to curb that behavior that is going on in that community. So realistically, if you start to work with the social aspect of a community, you're not going to need as much police presence. So what does that say about the money that's needed to fund the department? It doesn't need to go to the department in that manner. It can be spent on other things, but we have to look at that realistically and knowing that we have not really invested enough into the social change of that community. And I think that's something worth looking at.
Right. I mean, we can look to the war on drugs and what happened in Black communities compared to you don't hear about a war on opiate use, right?
That's right.
Hear about treatment and resources, right? There are lots of components I think that went into why Black and brown communities are so over policed, but fundamentally, I don't think you can separate it from where we started this conversation, which is racism.
That's right.
Right. That racism led to the under-resourcing of communities on the things that would make healthy communities. Racism led to the criminalization of certain behaviors that aren't criminalized in other places. Racism led to the over-incarceration of Black and brown bodies. right? Racism led to the over-policing of our communities. So I think we have to go back to what I think this moment is calling us to do, which is to address the one of the two original sins of this nation, right? I think the stolen land and the stolen bodies, right? It's racism. And
yeah.
All right, Karen Du Bois Wilton, Pastor John Lewis. Let's read some. I'm going to try to, I can't get all of you folks. I'm sorry. Thank you for listening in your comments. I'm going to try to get some of these in here real quick. Dave Hennon, white people need to own this problem. Systemic racism is our problem to solve. Rodney Williams says we have lack of minority contractors on projects. There have been multiple shootings in the daytime Eastern Circle. Let's give more jobs for Black and Brown. Dorothea Dottie Green. I do not like looking at our communities as war zones. That mindset simply helps systems in place justify the disrespectful approach. Tom Breen asked what you think about the two demands today of the march. We'll get back to this. We did address at quite some length the abolition issue, but we'll get back to these two. Roland Lamar, he's a state representative, says this comes down to political power. I'm a white politician in a political party that is only relevant because the Black and Brown communities that have empowered us to be bolder and more aggressive in achieving equity. Me and every Democrat in this country should be held to that standard first and foremost, made to answer and account for our advocacy and success in this vein. Me and every Democrat, I'm going to edit you a little bit, Roland. I think it's every Democrat and I should be asked at every turn, quote, what are you doing to dismantle systemic racism and white supremacy? It's not enough for us to agree with sorry about that. I'm a little punked as an editor. It's not, I can't automatically just read things. It's not enough for us to agree with Karen or BLM or Senator Winfield or whoever. It's a fight we need to use our agency and power on every day. And one of the most important voices, including the independent Edward III Fisk, one thing the white man can never give back, the Black man is self-respect. The Black man has to start self-correcting his own material, moral, and spiritual deficits and evil. The Black man has to lift up his own sense of values, quoting Malcolm X. You're listening to that Dateline. Any reactions before we move forward to anything you just heard in that rapid fire comments?
I think that, again, everything, I mean, even that last comment, we do have to start to, as a people, and again, no one's excusing no behavior. That's not what I would never excuse the behavior of any officer or any politician or those that are in power. However, I will not depend on them to make the change. I'm going to make the change. I have to decide to make the change and hold them accountable to assist, just like in the O.J. Simpson case. They said he wasn't guilty of the murder, but he was responsible of the murder. Well, America, those that are now, you may not have been guilty of the slavery. You may not have been the slave master. You may not have been the one that had our ancestors in the place that they have been or destroyed them in the way that you did, but you are responsible because you benefited from it and you are benefiting from it. And so I think it is right to do to make sure that, again, the table talk is reparations now. What have we really been given as a people? What if as a people? Now the Indians got some kind of compensation, but nearly not enough for lives that were taken. What is the African American community been given as reparations? A job, being able to live where others live that we desire to live. Have we ever really been given the opportunity? And so, generation after generation, what you're looking at is the generation of our children. The desires for change are now coming out of the mouths of our children who may not know how to articulate it. So now the house is burning. Now they are emotionally expressing things that we just talked about and we desire. And I'm saying right now, if we do not get a handle on this, if policies do not change, if things don't start to shift, this is just the beginning of sorrow. Just to quote something that's in the Bible, it's the beginning of sorrow. We need to really start to think about how we got to start to really make real change, not just talk, but hold our leadership and people that are in the positions to make that decision, hold them accountable to do that.
And I guess the piece I would pick up on, following on what Pastor Lewis has said, connects to what Representative Lamar was raising. So I appreciate hearing his voice in this. And we have to recognize that the state legislators who are representing the urban communities are outnumbered significantly by those who represent suburban communities, which tend to be predominantly white communities. And so in this moment where I'm seeing lots of white folks reckoning with racial inequities, and beginning to want to figure out how to move in this moment, I hope that they will align with work that the great leaders out of New Haven and other urban centers, but folks like Representative Lamar, Senator Gary Winfield, Representative Porter, Representative Walker, right, Representative Candelaria. I hope that people will pay attention to the issues that they are trying to move, and begin to align themselves in ways that will result in equitable funding to the urban centers that are providing the services for the whole community, that will align with them in ways that ensure that affordable housing opportunities are not only in the urban centers, but also exist in these suburban communities, right? Will align with them around educational funding, ECS formula changes, really that really equitably fund the system such that Black and Brown kids can thrive in our district. So I think that's a really key point. And the other thing I just want to raise up, because I can't be in this moment and not have faith and not be hopeful and not see joy and opportunity that are here. And I just want to raise up, the protesters are bringing me life and joy. Young people are bringing me life and joy.
Yes.
Conversations I have with my sons and their peers and their generation, there are ways in which they are light years ahead of where I was at that age around race equity, around inclusivity, around the issues that are so important to us right now. And I think their voices are powerfully leading. I was so inspired on Tuesday when I saw an African-American woman elected mayor in Ferguson, Missouri, a majority Black town that had not had Black leadership, that exploded after Derek Wilson took the life of Mike Brown. And the Brown family did not get justice. Those young people protested, rioted, whatever language you want to put to that, and they kept that activity going in ways that got people elected to the city council. They kept that going in ways that got a new DA elected. They kept that going in ways that got real police reform around what, use of force policies and what was criminalized and not criminalized in that city. And they got that going. They kept that going to the point that there's now a Black woman as mayor. Right, that is the power of young people. That's the power of activism. That's the power of sustained activity, purposeful activity, and that's what I hear. In this movement is protesters making the room to hear the voices of people who are bringing forth real reform ideas, and we need to bolster that, surround that, move that forward, highlight that, and keep chipping away and moving things moment by moment, passing more and more change, forcing policy change, electing who we want in offices, and make the change we want to see.
I mean, and that
this were 52 minutes. If this were 52 minutes after the hour, I'd say that brings it home, and you can listen to Dateline New Haven. We got a few more minutes left after Lewis. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say, but as Karen was saying, that brings us back to even when the civil rights movement, they boycotted the buses for 365 days. And so they were walking the rain. They didn't want to get on the bus. They crippled that whole system. And so what I see, as Karen said, these young people are committed to that. And that movement will start to get what needs to be done. And so, again, I'm just encouraging them, continue on to protest, continue on to do it, the peaceful protest. We're not talking about rioting because, again, we're not looking to destroy our own community. This doesn't make sense. But what I'm saying, do what needs to be done. Boycott, shut things down, block the highways, do whatever needs to be done. I think on the highway, that was so powerful that they was able to shut down I-95 where the traffic had to stop. Now, even with everything that's going on nationwide, you got Nike, you got all these other big corporations now starting to speak out. Why? Because the dollar matters. The dollar really matters. And so sometimes people don't respect human life. They respect the dollar. But whatever means that we have to get it done, let's get it done. And that's what I see happening right now.
All right. We got more comments if anyone wants to go to Facebook. A lot of great comments from folks we're not going to be able to get to. And I want to thank Karen Du Bois Walton, Executive Director of the Housing Authority, Community Leader, Pastor John Lewis, two important voices in our community, help me see where we need to be focusing on as we deal with a crucial moment in our history. Things are going to change, and we're hoping to change for the better.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today on Dateline New Haven, folks. Thanks for making the time to be on, Karen and John.
Thank you,
Thanks
Paul.
to Eric Gross, our station manager, the miracle man behind the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free and protest free with us all weekend long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.